maybe it's more sounds too, that are coming out of me. I'm like, well, that's like an old Taiwanese grandma sound. Like, why is that sound coming out of me? Like, for instance, whenever my grandma would pick up something, she'd be like, "Isha." Like, it's just very, like, it's like deep within her. And I start to see myself do that. Like, I'll hear myself making these really like grunt noises, like "ay," or like "ay," just that sound. And I'm like, whoa, it's just from them. Like
Yeah.
I heard that as the sound of like frustration or picking up something heavy or like, like, yeah, that's the sound that just jumps out of me now.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you're saying that, like, oh, certain words or things that kind of come out, like, that's one of them for me, like sounds.
That is funny. Okay, now I think about it, I'm gonna start seeing if I can pinpoint who like spent a lot of time with their grandparents or like at least like the elders in that family. Because it's so funny because some of the people I can tell, I'm just like, you have like an old soul.
You are around old people.
Yeah, like you
for an
like
extended amount of time.
Exactly. What is good, y'all? It is your boy Jonathan Dumas, and this is Highly Visible and a Little Misunderstood, the show where we talk to the people we see every day because we don't know what we miss until we miss them. And it is really good to be back with y'all again. I hope y'all are taking care of yourselves. Last week was rough. Yeah, it was rough. Just the grieving. It comes in waves, you know what I mean? Post-election. And it already looks like it's going to be a long 4 years. Some of the picks have already come down. I'm not going to dive into that right now. I'm thinking about getting my boy Gustavo back on here so we can dive into that. Anyways, if you caught the last episode with Isaiah, I told y'all, he had a great way of like just grounding the time. If you haven't listened to that episode, I encourage you to do so. We just talked about the power of community and this idea of community being more than just your neighbors, but like all of us together and how we intertwine together and really identifying what authenticity can be, what it looks like to become you in a communal space or individually, and really flesh some of that out. It was a really fun, just really good conversation and grounding conversation, to be honest, when we're talking about authenticity and the place community has in it when community isn't necessarily ideal. Yeah, it was really good. Today's guest, though, I'm really excited to talk with you about. But before I get into that, I was having a conversation with somebody, and hold on just 1 second. It happened in the last few weeks because it was actually kind of wild. Liz, come here. You don't have to show your face on the camera. It's okay.
What's up?
No, you got to come closer. All right, the people. Let me adjust my mic because you don't want to be on camera.
No.
Okay, so I'm adjust this.
Not camera ready.
Okay. All right, y'all. So Linz is off camera. For you audio folks, it doesn't really matter. But Lindsay, if y'all don't know, Lindsay used to support with producing the show. And I say used to because she started to notice that her name was not on production credit. So Lindsay, do you want to talk to the folks about that?
Yeah, I was a little hot about that.
Yeah. She brought it up. We're all driving, and she's like, "Yo, I want to. Why am I not getting production credit?" And I said, "Well, this is funny. You want to take credit for work you're not doing. That's wild." Yeah, and there's a lot of episodes that she was getting credit for she did not help with. She hasn't helped since. When's the last time you helped with the episode? Actually produce that episode.
I don't know, but I was waiting for you to make a white joke about taking credit for shit that I didn't do. So okay, all right.
Well, I will say you need to get your cousins and your cousins and your white female women cousins for voting for reproductive rights and not for Kamala. But that's another subject. All right. Woof. All right, Linz. All right, I just want to clear the air. All right, clear the air about that. So thank you so much. I appreciate you coming over here and doing that. While you're here, though.
Happy to produce anytime.
Okay. While you're here, though, really quickly, I want to ask you a question. Mm-hmm. I've been taking Magic Mind for probably I've been doing their 7-day challenge. You know, I partnered with them. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed the difference in me since I've started taking Magic Mind?
I have.
Is that legitimate, or did you make a face? Like, what was that?
Well, the face was, I'm glad that you started doing a little bit more around the house.
Got him. We fucking got him.
Because, you got some clarity and, you just get shit done. And I like get shit done, Jonathan, especially in the house. You know
Okay,
what I mean?
all right, you're done. Thank you. Okay, I want to let y'all know that was completely unscripted. She don't have to throw me under the bus like that. Anyways, yeah, so yeah, so I've been taking Magic Mind. Y'all know I've been partnering with him and taking Magic Mind from our ex-producer. If you let her tell it, she'll let you know that I've been significantly more productive. And as I've said this before, like it really helps with my focus. Obviously, it keeps me locked in, has my energy going. And maybe if you have a partner that wants to passive aggressively tell you to do more stuff around the house, maybe that'll help. I have a code for you all. As I mentioned, I'm a partner with Magic Mind. You can get 48% off of your first subscription or 20% off of a one-time purchase using my code Highly20 at magicmind.com/Highly using the code Highly20, HIGHLY 20. Link and code to that is in the YouTube description as well as the show notes. Let me know how y'all like it. I want to really hear about your experience because I've had a wonderful experience myself. All right, y'all, today's guest. This is somebody I'm really excited for y'all to hear from. We had a wonderful conversation. Jocelyn Chung. If you haven't heard of her, if you haven't seen her work or heard her on all kinds of other podcasts, Jocelyn is a Taiwanese American author, graphic designer, and all-around creative. She's joining us to talk about her journey in bringing her beautiful book to life, When Love is More Than Words. We're going to be exploring intergenerational love, finding your authentic voice, and what it means to reclaim parts of yourself you thought you left behind. So let me set the scene for this episode a little bit more, y'all. Have you ever looked back at an old piece of your work or writing or picture or whatever, and you felt like a mix of nostalgia, embarrassment, and maybe a deep bit of gratitude? Jocelyn and I go there. We talk about navigating those moments of past vulnerability, evolving as storytellers, and the lessons that come with holding compassion for our younger selves. You're going to feel the love, the laughter, and the realness in the conversation, and I'm so hyped for y'all to hear it. All right, y'all, let's dive into this week's Hidden in Plain Sight story. All right, y'all, let's dive into this real quick. So, election night did not go the way that we thought it was going to at all. Could not have imagined it going that way. But we still had a night full of historic firsts, things that really represent something big for politics in the U.S. I'm as far as like state, like local politics all the way up, there was a ton of firsts, like 35 plus races across the country were just like historic first. I will say this about historic first. I don't like that, to be honest. Personally, I think I feel some kind of way because I was first in a lot of different ways growing up, and I feel like there's a level of tokenism that happens there, unfortunately. Also, it's 2024. If we're talking about first black person this, first woman this, first disabled this, first Asian this, like I think that we should be significantly past that. So that's what I would say. But the thing is, we need a win. We need to celebrate something. And these are a very big deal. There was a lot of them that happened. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to do some quick highlights of the ones I was able to track down. Let's see. First up, we witnessed the groundbreaking moment as Sarah McBride became the first openly transgender person elected to the U.S. Congress. Lisa Blunt Rochester will be the first black and female senator from Delaware. And let's not forget, in Maryland, Angela also Brooks made history as the first black woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state. And both of them, this is also a first. So for Lisa Blunt Rochester and Angela also Brooks, for them to be in the Senate at the same time, two black women, that hasn't happened ever. So that's a humongous deal there. Ruben Gallego beat Carrie Lake, U.S. Senate seat for Arizona, and that was a tight race. And Ruben Gallego, became the first elected Latino U.S. Senator in that state. Over in Kentucky, Keturah Herron became the first LGBTQ plus person of color elected to the Kentucky State Senate. And let's not forget about Rashawn Kemp, who was also elected as the first openly gay black man in the Georgia State Legislature. Yeah, so I just wanted to celebrate these like sparks of joy, these moments, because we are going to need them. All right, y'all, that is it for the Hidden in Plain Sight story this week. I don't have anything else. All right, here is my conversation with the one and only Jocelyn Chung. Jocelyn, hi, how's it going?
Hi, Jonathan. Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. I am really excited to have you, my friend, to talk about your book. This is so exciting. When love is more than words. This is amazing. You're an author. How does that feel?
It's pretty surreal. Yeah,
Mm.
I think it's starting to settle in, but even when I walk into a bookstore or if someone sends me a photo of they're at a bookstore and it's on the shelf, I kind of get like a jump scare a little bit, like, oh no, it's not supposed to be there. And then like, oh wait, yes, it's supposed to be there. It's taking up its space, it
Yes.
looks beautiful on the shelf. So it's been a process, but I'm taking it all in.
That is so cool. That's so cool. I always do this almost with every single guest. I like jump into the conversation and I forget to allow folks the space to introduce themselves because we were already talking before I hit record.
Oh yes, that's right.
uh, for folks that don't know you, and I really think that they should, why don't you give like who is Jocelyn? Like, how would you introduce yourself? Go ahead and give the people a little something, something.
Well, my name is Jocelyn Chung. I am a Taiwanese American author and graphic designer. I'm kind of a creative of all sorts and love the intersection of storytelling, empathy, honest conversation, and a little bit of playfulness on the side. I'm based in Southern California and now Central California as well. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. Just
Sweet.
released a new book,
There
which
you
you just
go.
plugged already for me.
Come on now.
When Love is More Than Words, with my lovely illustrator, Julia Quill. And yeah, that's me.
Yeah. So dope. So dope. So just backtracking just a little bit. I think I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because I remember the first time we met was on a panel years ago in another life for both of us.
Several software updates prior in both of our lives.
Truly. But I do remember that panel we spoke on together. And I just remember like, yo, this chick like not only gets it, but like the way that you frame things, the way that you like break it down in not only a relatable way, but like I think it really feels like storytelling is in your DNA because the way that you like just share things, it just really connects and resonates with people. I remember all the ahs and mm-hms like as you were talking because I was doing it too. And then I know Lens is like, I'm not on Instagram as much, but Lens is like stayed in contact with like messaging back and forth and stuff like that. So it's really cool to like see your journey from afar, but also go through my own process. And now we're here reconnecting again. And I got to hear you read your book, your kid's book, and just like had all the feels in that small little room with the 10 other people in there. It was just so cool. So had to have you on the pod to talk about the process, where it came from, just like the journey with you as a creative. So thanks again for coming on. That's a good
No,
intro.
thank you for having me. It was so crazy, for everyone listening. I was at my first reading for my new book and in Long Beach at Bel Canto Books. And then all of a sudden, Jonathan and his wife, Lindsay, start walking up and they're like, hey. And I was like, what? I feel like I had to like rub my eyes, like, whoa. I had no idea who was going to show up to this reading. And I was just like, what in the world? This is several lifetimes ago. We're coming back together. And it was so nice to get to like catch up with you and be like, hey, what are you up to now? And again, like you saying all those things, I felt like when I was on that panel with you, gosh, what is that? 2019 in New York or something?
I
I
have
don't
no idea.
know.
It was somewhere.
I
Yeah.
don't remember, somewhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, just so long ago, and yet at the same time, remember you also being such an engaging storyteller, and I
Mm.
love to see that you're now like engaging that through this podcast as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about your book really quickly. When Love is More Than Words. So for folks who don't know, kind of give like a brief overview of like what the book is and how it came to be for you.
Yeah. This book, it's a children's book that I just released. It was written about 3 years ago now. The storyline is basically tracking through my own family story. So in some way, it's autobiographical, even though it's a children's book. And it talks about all the ways in which my family shares their love without having to say I love you.
Mm.
Culturally, a lot of Asian families don't say the words I love you, or maybe a lot of immigrant families in general, maybe just families of color in general as well, just, have a difficulty saying I love you sometimes. And it was really important to me to communicate that there are more than one way to say and communicate care and love in a family.
Mm.
I wanted that to be shown through intergenerational care because I grew up with my great grandma until I was 16 years old. So I grew up seeing, my grandma be a daughter, my mom be a daughter, myself as a daughter, and now my nieces as daughters. And so that was a really important context and framework for me to understand the world. And I wanted to capture that feeling of intergenerational love and care in my family now in this book. And that came to be through a very long process, but literally started with an Instagram DM, which is the craziest part.
It's just wild.
An editor reached out to me on Instagram and DM'd me and was like, hey, I've been reading I had journal entries on Instagram, and they reached out to me and said, hey, did you know you're a writer? Do you have any pieces that you're interested in publishing? And I was like, what are you talking about? No, I'm not. And also, what does that mean? And they were very generous to then offer me just some time and space to get to know what the publishing world is like. And they kind of gave me a little intro to it. And about a year later, I got back to them because I didn't have anything at the time. Got back to them and was like, hey, I have something now. And then the ball was set in motion, and here we are.
Here we are. Amazing. What's interesting, and I think I asked you this, there is you weren't always envisioning this to be a kid's book, right? I can't remember what you said
No.
during the reading, to be honest with you.
Well, maybe because we both have some roots in evangelicalism. This started off as a poem that was shared during testimony time.
Okay.
For small groups.
Yeah, okay.
That was then revisited many years later in a hospital room with my grandpa. Then was kind of reworked, but the original framework was this poem. So it was this poem that I wrote once for myself, and then to share with my small group, and then later on to reflect on my experience of caretaking with my grandparents. But yeah, kind of funny. I mean, it's kind of interesting that we're now reconnecting from that time because the poem has origins from that era of my life.
Yeah.
And maybe some of that storytelling too, and things that I'm still wrestling with, is it has that root in that time period of my life. And I've since kind of evolved and grown and changed and shifted since then. And sometimes I'm like, am I still a storyteller? What kind of storyteller am I? What is authentically my voice anymore? Now that my identities have changed and shifted. And so I think that something that has been helpful for me to ground myself is that this story that was taken and written at a very specific time in my life for a very specific purpose has evolved with me into this new medium where it's now a children's book, and now people can hold it and read it and see their own families in it. And that is still authentically my voice as well.
That's such a cool perspective and framing of that, because I was going to ask you about that actually, because I'm I remember you saying that this was something that you wrote a while ago, and then you just revisited and you're like, actually this is it. I want to do something with this more. And so to hear now that it was actually from a completely different time as far as small group time, it's that actually gives more, I don't know, gives more to the story, because I know that there's certain things that I've written before or I've done, and I have a very hard time going back to it, especially when it's during that time.
Yeah.
And so what was that like for you to I don't know, look at this and be like, this means something different now in this hospital room, with your grandparents?
I think I have a twofold answer to that.
Yeah, give both of them.
One part that I'm one part that I'm still struggling with is having grace and empathy for myself from that past version of me. I'm still reckoning with some of the things that I perpetuated, the things that I did that were harmful, the parts of me that were, in a very different version of my life. And I think that part is, I still struggle also with going back to old pieces of writing. And there's some journal entries and stuff that I can't reopen yet. Like, it's just too hard for me to look back in.
Same.
Yeah, and that's a really tricky thing, to have the empathy for yourself and be like, oh, I this was real for me at the time when I wrote it, and also the way that I feel about it now is also real for me too. But I think looking back at that poem, the storytelling pieces of like the legacy of my family and the way in which I viewed myself in this context of like generational love, that was still true all along. And so I felt like I really pulled on that and was like, okay, how do I then tell a story and frame it in a way that, while I was in that hospital room with my grandpa and sitting there, and we're in this like very sanitary, very sterile hospital room, but like there's love all around us. How do I encapsulate and capture this moment, to then communicate that like no words need to be spoken for love to be had? And that is something that every adult and every child should know, so that they can recognize that there's love all around them in their lives. So twofold, like I still struggle with going back to old pieces of writing. But I think also in this case, there was a potential there that I saw, that there's a deeper story that I wanted to continue to tell.
Something about that like strikes me like very deep. Because I think for me, when I think back, and I don't even know why we're talking about this right now, but since we're going there, let's like go there all the way.
Let's go.
Yeah. So
Let's go.
I don't know why when I think back to those times, because I wrote a lot, I did a lot, I said a lot, that like there is such a deep hesitancy to go back and revisit old things that I've done, because I feel there's like a shame and a guilt that is attached to it.
I feel embarrassed sometimes.
Embarrassed is too, yeah, embarrassed
Yeah.
for sure. Of like the lack of understanding and knowledge of the world and the people around me, or even the desire to know more about folks and people around me and stories, right? But like to your point that you said, there was still something there that like still remained true and was like resonant with you and like still is with you, right? And so when I think about even authenticity, being real, who is Jonathan? I still, with myself, am still trying to have like grace for what previous Jonathan didn't know, was not aware of, and also what he was like trying to protect himself from too. If I'm being like radically compassionate with myself, right? Um, and so like I think that that's a challenge when we trying to be ourselves and growing and evolving and allowing, not holding and clenching on to, I don't know. I don't know if it's like holding on to something or keeping that door closed. Maybe it's probably keeping the door closed from like things that would actually reveal more about ourselves if we allow it, if we go through it, instead of being more avoidant. And I'm not projecting on anyone. I'm like really speaking from my own experience. And so I'm like tempted, now that you said all that, to actually go back and look at certain things that I've written and wrote and like see what is there. Because I've done it before, but it's like more recent Jonathan that I've gone back, and that I'm like, oh wow, I wrote that. Okay, cool. That's encouraging for me now. But I don't know. I don't know. I think that's just such a cool perspective, and I'm just like, as you said, that I'm like wrestling with that right now.
And maybe that's the beauty about true authenticity, is like how unpolished it all is, that this journey is just what it is. Like, you cannot like polish away every blemish and every curate, I guess, that what the journey has been.
Mm,
Who we are as people is just the sum of all the stories and things that have happened to us, and we cannot curate that away when, especially when we're writers or creators, like things that we've made in the past, like they hold something true of who we were during that time. And what I've been trying to do is be a little bit more brave to go back and be like, okay, I love what you said about being radically compassionate. I think I need to practice that more,
mm,
rather than being like radically critical and radically um, hostile towards
mm,
the older versions of myself. Just like, like, why were you so blah 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 blah?
mm, mm,
Um, and instead being like, oh, like you were having a genuine experience of how you saw the world and what you were experiencing around you. Like those things were all true to younger Jocelyn, younger Jonathan.
mm.
Um, and yet also what we are experiencing now is also true. And that is the hard thing about authenticity, is that even things that we say on this podcast now, it might not always be what we are feeling and believing in the future, but this is like a time capsule of what was true to us at this very moment.
Mm.
um, and what is beautiful about humans is that we evolve and we change, and yet I think something really beneficial about looking back. And I hope that you do get to look back, and I hope that this is accountability for me too, to also go back and look at some of my old things too. Is that you'll see yourself and be like, oh, like that is still me.
Mm,
Like those parts of me are still a part of me. Um, Even if I don't think this way about this certain thing anymore, or don't hold these things to myself anymore, uh, these attributes are still like core to who I am. Um, and that's kind of reassuring in its
mm.
own way. Like, oh, there is some consistency anchoring you down a little bit, even when things are still changing. Like, there's some core parts of you that stay the same.
Yeah. And I think that that's like a grounding perspective, but also just like really grounding in and of itself, that there are core parts of us that, like, through it all, through changes, through evolution, whatever like happens in our lives, that still remain true to us, right? Whether we look back and we're like, why did I do that? Or I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I could go back to that. There's something that there through all of that, if we give space and allow it to be, where as we
Mm.
continue to shape and become whoever we're becoming, um, uh, that are still there. Um, and how do we, I don't know, allow those things to be and still exist and give space and room for those things? Um, Mm, that's refreshing. I'm glad we went down that that trail. That
It's
was really refreshing. Yeah,
unexpected, but also, yeah,
yeah.
it's like it's still a painful part. At least I'll speak for myself. Like
No,
it's
it's
still a
painful
very
for me
painful
too.
part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
No,
I feel that what that thing that you did when you were like, oh, like I'm protecting and also trying to like separate from, yeah,
mm,
it's hard to explain to people who maybe haven't experienced being so deep into religion or a faith system or whatever it might be, and
mm,
then have slowly evolved out of it in some ways,
mhm,
or allowed ourselves to grow in different ways or allowed our faith to expand.
mhm.
um, it's hard to explain how painful some of those things can
Yeah,
be.
yeah. No, it really is. It's like yeah. It's really hard to explain. I try my darndest, but like I really can't. Um, And I've had people come to me and like, "Oh man, I used to look up to you." I was like, "I didn't even talk to you that much, bro. I don't even know you like that. I did not know you like that then." But apparently
Mm,
they looked up to me when I was doing that, and now that I'm like saying the things and doing the things that I'm doing, and I'm like, I don't actually owe you an explanation as
mm,
to like my evolution, change, growth. Um, if you haven't been there within the journey itself, right?
Mm.
And that sounds more woo-woo than to some folks than it needs to be, but it truly is true. I think that that's a healthy boundary to have, and boundaries that when I was in that world of evangelicalism did not exist. That I felt that everybody, my testimony was owed to everyone, and that allowed
Oh,
my story to be
yeah,
used and abused. And at that point, how can I be me? How can Jonathan be Jonathan? Um, uh, in those spaces, it's actually really difficult because of the expectations and pulling and tugging and desire and just willingness to take of me, especially if
right,
you're in predominantly white spaces. Like they feel owed,
right.
owed, and it's and you should almost parts of you feels thankful that you're accepted in those spaces, right? And others aren't. That you're the exception, which is all bullshit. but I think that there's
It
something.
makes my skin crawl,
It
like
does.
you explaining that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
you feel you should appreciate that they want your story, but
Yeah.
they just want to keep taking
Yeah.
from you.
Yeah. And like when I think back to those times, what's interesting is that I don't think that I in those moments knew that that was happening. Actually, I know that
Mm,
that those didn't happen. Anytime it felt like it was happening, I was almost gaslighting myself of like, no, like these
right,
people care for me. They love me. They wouldn't put me on stage. I wouldn't have this opportunity or be sent this place like if they didn't care about me. But I think when I think
right.
about, and I'm gonna bring it back to like your book, I promise. When I think about care and love, I think that that's what opened up my eyes, particularly in 2015, 2016, around some of the things that were happening. Some of the things were being said, and people were showing their entire asses as to like who they are and not reflecting the gospel or the teachings that they were saying and or that I was reading, right? Um,
Right.
and I think that there was something deeply troubling and wrong with that. And when I recognized that and saw that
Mm,
and actually paid attention and listened to my body and my emotions and the experiences that I was having, and also paying attention to the people, were like, it was cool that I sang up on stage, but nobody
mm,
said anything to me afterwards after church. That is like, there's something to me that's like, that's not care, that's not love, that's not like even involvement. That I'm your entertainment, right? I'm your whatever.
mm,
And so I think that
mm,
there's something deeply troubling with that for me.
mm.
Um, that ultimately like that's when I made the decision to like make some decisions and changes and really truly embracing myself. Um, again, this conversation is going somewhere completely different than I intended, but um, but I promise we're gonna land this plane.
No,
Yeah.
but I just want to like pause on that because like you were exploited,
Hmm.
and I think it's hard because the story that we then tell ourselves in that time is like, oh, but I was willing. It's like so abusive in that way. Like
Yeah.
but I wanted to serve. I wanted to give up my gifts, my story, my whatever it might be. But and so we have a difficulty explaining that, like, but we were still exploited.
Mm,
Like our gifts, our personhoods were still exploited for
mm.
and commodified for something else other
Mm.
than what we originally intended, and maybe still are. Like I still see my image floating around in
Me
some
too.
like
It's so
brochures and
frustrating.
stuff,
It's
you
so
know, and
frustrating.
you're like,
Yeah.
oh man, like my image is still being exploited. Like my diversity on the pamphlet is being exploited still.
Mm,
um and so I want to say that, like, even you reclaiming your voice through this pod, through your different ways of mentoring and bringing up other leaders, I think that is a beautiful way that you're reclaiming both your personhood, your story, and helping bring other people along in that too, because it's extremely painful to go from yeah, gaslighting yourself and being like, well, I did this to myself.
mm,
I was a willing participant in my own abuse. To like, oh no, that was abuse. That was
mm.
still, I did not know what I did not know, and now the powers that were over me were uh far larger than I thought that they were. and also more insidious than I knew that they were. And you can have grace and compassion for yourself back then, who didn't know and was trying your best to protect yourself too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying
Yeah.
that. And I accept that. That's absolutely true. And
Mm.
at the same time, as you were saying that, like parts of me feels like this book, and I don't know if you would say this, is like a reclaiming of that too for you during that time of where it started and where it's at now. Um,
Yeah.
does that feel accurate? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, I think that is very accurate. I think for a very long time, and again, this is apologies that continues to go back to its evangelical roots, but I cannot help but see my life through this context because it's just it is inseparably part of my story.
Mm-mm.
And I think for a very long time, I felt like I had to constantly give up my story for my testimony, for a greater sermon or message, to prove a greater point, um, whether or not I really wanted to give it or not, or whether or not people were really deserving to hear it, to be
Mm,
honest, whether they had even earned my trust
mm,
for me to tell them that level of intimate parts of who I was. Um, yeah, I think for a long time and still now, I'm struggling with understanding the boundaries of what storytelling when storytelling is overly vulnerable,
mm,
to a point where it's like, oh, okay, that's like concerning, like maybe you should like reflect on that on your own and think about it for yourself, um versus allowing stories to be out in the world to in a healthy way. And I think that this story was one for reclaiming for myself, but also it just came about in such a natural way.
mm,
um it truly came out of a place of love for my family and a desire for parents and kids to be able to see that love does not always have to be said through "I love you," and that it could be shown in a multitude of different ways, and that is valid and beautiful in all of its forms. Um, and that was a true and honest hope for this story.
mm,
And so I think now looking at it, I can look at it with this appreciation of like, okay, this is maybe where it started, in this context of a poem shared in small group and then reworked again and rewritten again in a hospital.
mm,
But now it's somewhere where it can live in the homes of different people, for them to read as a cozy bedtime story or a story for adults to read to their inner child. Um, and I feel really proud of that.
mm. That's so cool. I Dang it, I want to ask two questions and I don't want to forget the other one. So I'll ask the first one and hopefully I'll remember the second one. You had mentioned earlier that there's like a almost like a fine line between, yes, I want to tell this story. I feel like this is appropriate boundaries for me to share vulnerably, being real, whatever, authentic out in the world. And then there's other parts where like, oh, that might be overshare. Like, how do you find that balance, especially as a creative who writes, who designs? How do you found how if you found that balance? How do you found that balance between that? Like, I want to share this, I don't want to share this part.
um, I think that I'm still trying to figure this out.
Mm,
But I will say that it has shifted pretty dramatically over the past at least 3 years for me. Um, I think a big shift was realizing that I do not need to share every bit of my process, my inner soul, like behind the curtain, what's going on for me to be valued
mm,
as a storyteller.
mm,
Like, I don't need to then maybe exploit my own unfinished work that is happening within me to then have people be like, wow, what a beautiful story. Like, I did not have to give the raw, in real time details all the time.
mm,
I think there's a time and the place where, you know, sharing where you're at in the current moment has its beautiful place to be able to welcome people in, to receive care, to be able to share with other people, hey, this is what's going on. But I think realizing that like there's a time and place for that for friends, and then the different circles in our lives, like not everyone in all of your circles needs to know everything that's going on all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And maybe during 2020, there was a lot of that going on social media. I don't know about you, but my feeds were looking pretty messy. I felt like everyone was just verbally vomiting everything that was happening in real time and what they were thinking about it. And maybe that was trying our bids for connection during the pandemic. We were like, hey, like we want to feel like we can still see and touch each other even though we're far away. um but at the same time, I think now learning for me is saying like, okay, how do I allow myself to feel anchored in my community, in my reality, the real people that are in my life? How do I then write and share stories in a way that are first rooted and grounded in me, and then in the people around me, and then after that, then maybe they can go a little bit further and go into, you know, different people or sharing it with a greater audience. But I think for myself, it's come with trying to understand that I need to have this grounded feeling, not this sense of like alertness and like agitation. And I felt like I was in a fight or flight mode for a really long time, writing and then like immediately posting, or writing and immediately like sending it out into whatever it is where I was sharing like my writing and creativity in such real time that I had not even really allowed it to settle within my own soul. And so now I think I try to find that sense of anchoring for myself. Like, how does this feel? Again, like have those filters first. And sometimes it never gets beyond myself. Sometimes it never gets beyond my um, real life community and circle around me. And I'm realizing that's okay. Like there's a beauty in keeping some stories um, to ourselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like we've lost the art of that?
Mm.
Of like
Yeah.
keeping like those things that are, I don't know, those stories, those moments, those even creative things, right? Poems, whatever. Do you think we've lost the art of just like keeping that to ourselves, like keeping it personal?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think so.
Mm.
And maybe that's just between us and maybe our own experiences. I feel like I've met maybe older people who have been more grounded
Oh
or
yeah.
more wise.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm not grown up in the time that we're growing
Yeah,
up
with
in.
social
And
media,
like,
that's yeah.
right, social media makes it very different, and it becomes your business card
Mm.
for writing and creative opportunities. Right, like literally my writing journey came about through social media because of Instagram.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so having to reckon with that and be like, well, not everything needs to be on Instagram. And yeah, there is a lost art form of the internal voice, and like that, you know, maybe when we were younger, we kept like I don't know, a doc or a journal that was kept secret just for us, a sketch pad, whatever it might be. Um, yeah, I think cultivating that, when that inner like soul garden is really tended to and like blooming and blossoming and doing its thing, then like everything else that comes out from that can be really, really beautiful as well, and rooted and grounded. And that is my hope now, is that like the things that I write and the things that I do spur a sense of groundedness and love and care, rather than like agitation, hurry, um, I don't know, aggression,
Yeah.
or like a sense of urgency or franticness,
Mm.
because I know that in the past I was in that place uh, from my own life experience and everything that was going on with me, um, but wanting to now be a more grounded creative and just person. I want to be a more grounded friend and person to the people around me. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question,
It
but
does. Yeah, it
yeah.
does. Absolutely. Speaking of flourishing and things coming out that are just like amazing, like I want to circle back to your book because right before we hopped on, I read it again. I just read it in silence at my house in the living room on my nice little couch, and I just like almost started tearing up because like first of all, it's like gorgeous. Like Julia did a goddamn thing with this book. Like it's
Yes, she
beautiful.
did.
Yes, it's absolutely gorgeous. But I think that the first time I heard it was when you read it during your reading a couple weeks ago, and this is like the second time me like holding a book and like really immersing myself in the pages. But I told you before we hopped on that like as I was reading it, like I felt immersed in the not the story, but like in the pages, but not in with your family or what was happening there. But almost as I was reading it, I was taken back to my own childhood, my grandma's kitchen. I could smell, you know, her greens and fried chicken and all that stuff, her
Mm.
spaghetti. I could smell my great grandmother's like I don't know what the trees are called, but there's these like big gigantic tree bush things, whatever. But I could smell those because she had 8 of them lined in like this row in different columns in front of her house. Um, like I could still taste her hibiscus tea. Like as I'm looking at all of this food,
Oh.
like all these different things, like it's bringing me back to it. And I mean, I don't think I realized like how much she meant to me until she passed.
Mm.
Um, and me not being able to like see her before she passed like just one more time, like it just like all brought it back like reading this book. um
Whoa.
and I think that that's just I don't know, it's a testament to the words and also like the art. And just like my inner child just like sometimes just needs a reminder of like
Mm.
you are so loved. Just because she can't tell you now doesn't mean she hasn't left like these little memories with you to remind you how much she
Mm.
loved you or cared for you. um I don't know. So I just want to make sure I told you that again. Like it's just I
I
just love this book. I just love this book so
That's
much.
so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
That's just so cool that it transported you to your own family like moments.
Yeah.
And like that you were smelling and seeing all those things again as you're reading the story. Like that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
What what do you miss the most about your great grandma?
So my great grandmother, she
Oh,
had cerebral palsy. So she couldn't really
mm,
at like a good portion of my life, I don't remember her like talking. Like there was a she was bedridden by closer to the end of her life, and then she wasn't able to really like speak fully. Um but like when you looked into her eyes, like you knew what she was saying. Um And I think I miss 2 things most. I think I miss the smile that she had on her face, like, she just, like, lit up when she saw me.
mm,
And I think she says my name no other way. Nobody else could say my name the way, she says it. And I think I remember
mm,
I miss her calling my name, when she first saw me,
mm,
like, when I walked into the door or when I came to her bedside or something like that. Like I miss that. Um,
mm.
and I'm not gonna like beat up on myself for not being able to not going to visit her sooner, or anything like that. Like I was in college and then I just didn't have money to go. but but like every single time I talk to my grandma or my mom, they're like, you know, she prays for you every single night by name. And
Mm.
so, um, yeah, those are the 2 things I always think about when I think about her. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm,
Even the sound of your name. Like, I feel both the grief, and that also makes me think of my own, like, family members calling my name in a specific way. Like, no one really talks about that level of grief, of like the way that your name sounds in their lips,
mm,
um, is something so special and like intimate, and a way of being known in a way that only they could bring out in you.
mm.
Um, yeah, I hope that you'll hold that memory of like the way that it sounds, the intonation of her voice and all that, that sticks with you
Yeah.
in some way with you. throughout your life.
Yeah, me too. I there was, what was it? While I'm thinking about this, I'm gonna ask you a question, and then I'm gonna see if I can find it in
Mm-hmm.
your in on the page, particularly that like reminded me of something. But oh no, my brain. Hold on,
That's okay.
where'd it go? ADD, right back at it again. It's all good. It's not. I'll come up with another question. It's
If
gone.
it comes up again, then feel free
Yeah,
to cut me off.
it'll come.
I
It'll come
had
back.
I had another I had another question for you
Yeah,
though.
please.
Um, for you growing up in like an intergenerational family, how did that shape your identity and like sense of self?
Hmm. I've never. Thank you for asking this question. I've never actually thought about it. There was a time where me and my brothers lived with my grandma and grandpa for the longest time, and we also went over there almost every single weekend growing up. So they were just like a big, gigantic part of my life. Just always seeing my grandparents and my uncles and my aunt. But my uncles are like really close to me in age, so they felt like more like cousins rather than uncles and aunt. Um, so it always felt like really integral. But I when I think back to like music choice or things that I like to do or anything like that, like there is like a heavy influence um from my grandparents. Like even the things that I say now, I'm like, goodness gracious, like things like just get passed get passed down. You don't even realize it. The sayings you say or whatever, it's like there are things that are like, okay, that's like culturally like black, like American wise.
Hmm.
But then you're like, nah, that's like a like a grandparent, aunt, old aunt and uncle, like kind of situation. It's just so funny. Because like my favorite genre of music, outside of like soul and neo soul, is gonna be like anything from the 80s or 70s or 60s. Like that genre of music is I'll always go back to that as just classic. It's just easy to play, just incredibly talented, like Motown, like just all these vibes. Um, and it's a major reason why a lot of the people that I even like now have heavy influences from those folks. Um,
Hmm.
uh, so it's just really, really interesting. But yeah, I would say that's probably it. Also, a big value that I didn't realize I had. I think I was having another pod conversation. I don't know. I don't remember when, but like a big value of mine is like community and
Hmm.
that was actually instilled from my family of like my grandma. We always had friends over. Like there was always people over at the house, and even for my mom's kept that going. And then we like even in my family right now, my immediate family, me and Lynn's, like we do that. There's always somebody in the house. Like, well, you can come crash here. We have an extra room, all that
Hmm.
stuff. We purposely got like an extra bed so people could stay here. And we love having people over. And I love that that's a shared value of ours. And I didn't realize like that was actually something that was passed down. Um,
Wow.
just having like a busy home and like caring for people and being open and stuff like that and having a
Hmm.
place for people to stay and stuff. So yeah, yeah, that's mine. How about yours?
That's so cool.
Yeah, how about you?
Hmm. The sayings part, when you said that, that also made me think of that too. Like I'm seeing more sayings, or maybe it's more sounds
Mm.
too, that are coming out of me. I'm like, well, that's like an old Taiwanese grandma sound. Like, why is that sound coming out of me? Like, for instance, whenever my grandma would pick up something, she'd be like, "Isha." Like, it's just very, like, it's like deep within her. And I start to see myself do that. Like, I'll hear myself making these really like grunt noises, like, "Ay," or like, "Ay." Just that sound, and I'm like, "Whoa."
Like where did that
And
come
it's just,
from? Yeah.
yeah, where's that coming from? But that's just from them. Like
Yeah.
I heard that as the sound of like frustration or picking up something heavy, or like, like Yeah, that's the sound that just jumps out of me now.
Yeah,
So it's funny that you're saying that, like, oh, certain words or things that kind of come out, like that's one of them for me, like sounds.
that is funny. Okay, now I think about it, I'm gonna start seeing if I can pinpoint who like spent a lot of time with their grandparents or like at least like the elders in that family. Because it's so funny because some of the people I could tell, I'm just like, you have like an old soul.
You were around old people
Yeah, like
for
you
an
like there's
extended
some
amount of time.
exactly, and you just like know. Um, it's just really funny because like my grandparents aren't even like that, like they're not even that old. So when I was growing up around them, it was just like it was just a different generation above, but it's just still it's so interesting, it's so funny.
That's so
Oh my
funny.
god,
That's
that's
so
hilarious.
funny. And
Oh,
then I think another one for me that I'm noticing that I have carried on, which sometimes I've noticed have been, when you say like what things are cultural, what things are family, I think that this is like a family generosity plus mixed with culture as well. Like preemptive care is a big one. Like I
mm,
will get you what you need before you even know that you need it yourself.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so whether that be like I'm going to constantly be thinking one step ahead of how I can make you feel comfortable, welcomed, noticed.
Mm,
Um, whether that be like, oh, before you even asked for a drink, before you even asked, whether or not like there's any snacks or anything, like I've already brought it out for you.
mm,
I've already like preemptively got that prepared for you so that your needs are met preemptively. And I think that's something that I grew up seeing a lot in my family. Before I even had to say a word, it was already brought out and said like, "Hey, okay, do you need this? Do you need this? Like, I got it for you. It's covered. You don't even have to ask. I'm almost reading your mind for your needs." And in that way, on the flip side of that, I'm noticing that like I remember feeling very like it was very overbearing care at the same
yeah,
time
it's a lot.
of like, oh my gosh, like like I'm fine, like I don't need anything. And I'm realizing I'm like, oh no, I also have that. I'm doing that to like my nieces, my partner, like
Yeah,
like I'm like chill, like it's okay. I don't
uh-huh.
need anything. Um and whether or not I can separate it from myself, I don't know, but that's still like something that they've also given
That
me
is so
a
funny.
slightly overbearing preemptive care for my needs.
Oh my god, that's what do you think that they would say, like, for some of the family that's passed on elders that what do you think that they would say about this book that you spent so much time with?
Hmm. Um I know what they would say because they did say it to me.
Oh, amazing.
Um, yeah, that they would be really proud and they would just be happy that our family legacy is being shared.
Oh my gosh.
Um, so I know that that's how my grandma felt. Um, I was imagining that if my grandpa was still around and he had seen this book, he was a big writer and annotator as well.
Oh, cool.
So I was joking with my mom that like his copy, if I imagine him having one of these copies in his hand, it would be like every page is like highlighted, annotated. He's maybe just translated it just for fun. He's maybe taken a photo of every ingredient and every like family member, taped it inside. Like he's cut out certain things.
Oh
Like
my gosh.
every page is dog-eared and there's post-it notes everywhere. Like I know that that's how he would have reacted, and that thought just makes me smile that he would I know that he would want to have like dug into this and like showed everyone as like a family scrapbook, like you want to see the book and then you want to see the real thing, like I have all the photos of all the fruit
Yeah,
and everything
that's
that I've
so
grown and
funny.
like,
Oh
oh,
my
here's
god.
me. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
So I
my
think that
god.
that also would have been their
Oh
reaction.
my gosh. That is amazing. That is amazing. Well, Jocelyn, I don't want to keep you for too much longer because we've almost been talking for a while. But again, the book is beautiful. And I think I remember what I was going to say before. It's like the influence of food, like the vegetables, the fruits, just like there's just so much that immerses you like inside of it. I think one of my there's two of my favorite pages on here. The one it's like the creation one. Like I love this with all the
Mm.
cardboard and everything like that. The airplane, all this stuff, especially the dog because I love that one. And then I think there's multiple food ones here, but the one that like I was looking at and I'm like, oh my god, oh it's this one. And I think that there's just so many like little nuggets
Mm.
inside
Mhm.
here, with the tiger balm, and then you got the oranges, the irises. Like there's so much like nuggets inside here. Um, I asked you this on your reading, and I'm wondering if it's changed. What is your favorite page? What is your favorite page on the book?
Oh, ever changing. Gosh, I actually think it's changed again from
Okay.
when we first chat, which is the beauty, and again, saying so much about Julia and her illustrations, but I think it's this one
That's a
now.
good one.
For those who are just listening, it's the page where a grandma is like cutting some vegetables. The whole frame is like a bunch of chopped vegetables, ginger, garlic, tomatoes, mushrooms, green onions everywhere. There's a mom also with a bowl out, and then there's a daughter who's like munching on something.
Mm,
And there's like, ingredients out, there's a bowl out. It's very alive. And I think why this one is currently my favorite is I've just been reflecting a lot on every Monday I used to have dinner with my grandma, my mom, and me.
mm,
And this was our scene. My grandma would be the one cooking. My mom would be, serving up food or, helping out in the kitchen. And I would just be happily eating whatever it is that they may be bringing to me. Um, but this scene of like three generations, I really miss this.
mm,
Yeah, this is something I remember being in it every Monday and being like, oh, I hope I remember every facet of what this room feels like and smells like right now and how my body feels in this moment. Getting to witness again my mom as a daughter and myself as a daughter and granddaughter, um, because it was really special and a lot of
mm,
storytelling happened around this, and it was real time, it was messy, it was gossiping, it was family tea, and it was also hard conversations and reflections on death and divorce, and
mm,
all these things happen in this kitchen, and so I'm particularly missing this at this moment in my life,
mm.
this three generation relationship. So yeah, this is currently my favorite because I
Amazing.
really miss this time. Yeah.
Amazing. The other favorite that I had was this one with, I don't know, like there's just
Oh yeah,
food on
all the
here.
fruit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This one's like, oh
Yes.
my gosh. Every time I look at this, it makes me hungry. Um, oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. The last question that I would have for you, if I'm saying this for the second time, I don't know. But what would be your advice to, writers, creators, or folks in general about finding and embracing their voice? You've said
Mm,
you've dropped a lot of wisdom around this, but like, what explicit advice would you give to somebody who's in that boat?
mm. I'd maybe bring it back to what we talked about earlier, which is write for yourself.
Mm,
Um, Write things that are honest and true and authentic to yourself, and write those things and keep some of those pieces just for you. Because again, when that like inner soul is tended to, gardens, and like pruned and stuff like that is where like things that are beautiful get to grow and like blossom out of that. And so I would say that like keep some things that are just for you. Make a silly story. Like not everything's got to be doom and gloom existential all the time. Like let it be fun. Like come up with a crazy fairy tale, like a crazy adventure. Yeah, find something new and challenge yourself in it, and keep it for yourself. And because just as you write as an offering and a gift to the world, um, you're also deserving of having good stories be told to yourself too. And um, yeah, there's beauty in keeping some of that just for
yeah.
you.
Yeah. Oofta. That's a good way to say it. That's good. That's good. There's a beauty in keeping things to yourself. I like it. Well, Jocelyn, where can folks find you, tap in, um, to the things that you're doing, and also purchase this beautiful journey of a book, When Love is More Than Words.
You can find me at jocelynchung.com or also on Instagram at Jocelyn S. Chung. And then you can find my book wherever books are sold, but I would recommend Bookshop. You can find your local indie bookstore that sells it, and you can support them through ordering it through there, or it's also on Amazon as well, Barnes & Noble, etc. So you can find it anywhere.
Amazing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drop all those links to you, Jocelyn, in the show notes, in the YouTube description, as well as a link particularly for bookshop.org. For this book, I already purchased my copy and I got it signed. Be jealous. Jocelyn, thanks so much for coming through. I know this conversation went places that we actually, honestly, were not anticipating, but I think they were healing for me. They were really good to revisit some of those parts, and also encourage me to kind of give myself space and room to explore and understand and give perspective and reframe some of those places I don't want to visit, because it can kind of give me more context for who I'm becoming instead of performing. So thank you so much.
Wow. Oh, dropping wisdom right at the end. Thank you, Jonathan.
Stop.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, see you.